You are nothing. You have always been nothing. And you will die as nothing. The words echoed through the stone corridors of the palace kitchens, and Ember Ashwood felt each syllable like a physical blow. Beta Logan stood over her, his polished boots inches from her face, where she knelt scrubbing the floor, and his voice dripped with the casual cruelty of someone who had never known consequence. She did not look up. She had learned long ago that meeting his eyes only made it worse. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the gray stone beneath her raw, reddened hands and continued scrubbing. The smell of lye soap burned her nostrils, mixing with the acrid scent of his displeasure. Around them, the other servants had gone silent, their movements careful and deliberate as they pretended not to notice. No one ever came to her defense. No one ever would. She was an orphan, a nobody, an Omega without a family name or a pack history. In the hierarchy of Moonhaven, she ranked somewhere below the hunting dogs and only slightly above the rats in the grain stores. "Did you hear me, girl?" Logan's boot connected with the bucket beside her, sending dirty water splashing across the floor she had just cleaned. Ember flinched but did not stop moving her brush. "Yes, Beta Logan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her wolf stirred somewhere deep inside her, a distant presence she had never been able to fully reach, never been able to shift into. Another mark of her inadequacy. Most wolves experienced their first shift at puberty. Ember was 22, and had never felt fur replace skin, never known the freedom of 4 legs and moonlight. The other Omegas whispered that she was broken, cursed, that whatever bloodline she came from had been so diluted by weakness that her wolf had simply given up trying to emerge. She believed them. Logan crouched down, and she could feel his breath on her neck, hot and invasive. The Alpha King returns tonight with his bride-to-be, Lady Seraphina. Blackthorn will not tolerate the sight of filth like you scurrying through her future home. If I were you, I would make myself scarce. Very scarce. He stood abruptly, his boots clicking against stone as he strode away, already dismissing her from his thoughts. Ember remained kneeling long after he left, her hands trembling as she wrung out her brush. Lady Seraphina Blackthorn. The name alone carried weight and power. The daughter of the Northern Pack's Alpha, a woman renowned for her beauty, her political acumen, and her complete ruthlessness. She would be the perfect queen for Alpha King Darius Thornwood, everyone said so. A political alliance that would unite 2 of the most powerful packs on the continent. And Ember would be nothing but another shadow in the background, as she had always been. She finished cleaning the floor in silence, gathered her supplies, and made her way through the servants' passages toward the small room she shared with 3 other Omega females in the Eastern Wing. The palace was alive with preparation for the king's return. Banners were being hung, floors polished to a mirror shine, the great hall decorated with winter roses and silver ribbons. Tomorrow night there would be a formal ceremony in the sacred grove where the Alpha King would present Lady Seraphina with the crimson moon collar, an ancient relic that had been passed down through the royal line for centuries. The collar was said to recognize true royalty, to glow when worn by someone of pure Alpha bloodline. It would be a spectacle of power and legitimacy, and Ember would watch from whatever shadowy corner she could find, if she was allowed to watch at all. The sun was setting when she finally reached the Omega quarters, a series of cramped buildings on the far edge of the palace grounds, where the servants lived in conditions that bordered on squalor. Her room was on the 2nd floor, a space barely large enough for the 4 straw mattresses that lay on the floor and the single trunk where they kept their few possessions. She climbed the narrow stairs, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Her hands ached. Her back ached. Her heart ached with a loneliness so profound it had become as familiar as breathing. She pushed open the door and stopped. Smoke. The acrid smell hit her before she saw the flames, before she heard the screams. Fire was consuming the building, moving with unnatural speed, racing up the walls and across the ceiling like a living thing. Ember stumbled backward, her mind blank with shock. The hallway behind her was already engulfed. The stairs she had just climbed were disappearing beneath hungry orange flames. Someone was screaming her name, one of her roommates, but the voice was cut off by a crash as part of the ceiling collapsed. She could not breathe. The smoke was too thick, burning her lungs with every gasping attempt to draw air. She fell to her knees, crawling toward the window, but the heat was unbearable. Her skin felt like it was splitting, peeling away from her bones. This was how she would die. Alone, forgotten, burned alive in a servant's quarter that no one would mourn. The thought filled her with a rage so sudden and fierce it shocked her. No, she was not ready to die. She was not ready to disappear without ever having lived. Something inside her, that distant sleeping presence she had always called her wolf, suddenly woke. Not gradually, not gently. It exploded through her consciousness like a dam breaking, and power flooded her veins with such force she screamed. The fire around her changed. Instead of orange and red, it turned silver. Ice-cold flames that did not burn her, but wrapped around her like a protective embrace. She stood, and the burning building seemed to bend away from her, creating a path. She walked through the inferno without thought, without fear, guided by an instinct she did not understand. When she emerged into the courtyard, the entire Omega Quarter was ablaze behind her. Wolves were running everywhere, bucket brigades forming, children crying, the night filled with chaos and ash. Ember stood in the center of it all, her clothes singed and smoking, but her skin unmarked, and clutched in her right hand was something that had not been there before. A necklace. No, a collar, made of silver so pure it seemed to glow with its own light, set with rubies the color of blood and moonstone that swirled with inner fire. The crimson moon collar, the relic that was supposed to be locked in the sacred vault beneath the palace. The relic that Alpha King Darius himself had been planning to present to Lady Seraphina tomorrow night. It was in her hand, warm against her palm, humming with a power that resonated through her bones. Impossible. The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Ember looked up and met the eyes of Alpha King Darius Thornwood for the first time in her life. He stood 10 feet away, having apparently rushed from the palace when the alarm was raised. He was exactly as terrifying as his reputation suggested. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence so commanding that the chaos around them seemed to still in his vicinity. His eyes were the color of winter storms, gray and cold and absolutely focused on her, on the collar in her hand. His beta, a man named Marcus, who Ember recognized but had never spoken to, stood at his shoulder looking equally shocked. "That is not possible," Marcus breathed. "The vault, it is sealed by magic. No one can enter. Without the king's blood." Darius did not respond to his beta. He moved toward Ember with the fluid grace of a predator, each step measured and purposeful. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the collar and flee, but her body would not obey. She stood frozen as he approached, his eyes never leaving hers, and she realized with a start that his expression was not anger. It was recognition. When he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the scent of pine and winter wind that clung to him, he reached out slowly and touched the collar. The moment his fingers made contact, silver light exploded between them. The collar flared so bright that people cried out and shielded their eyes. Ember gasped, a sensation unlike anything she had ever experienced flooded her system. Connection, belonging, completion. The mate bond snapping into place with such force it brought her to her knees. "No." Darius stepped back, his hand dropping away from the collar, his face a mask of controlled fury. "No, this is not possible. You are nobody. You are a servant. This is some trick, some—" He stopped, his jaw clenching as he visibly fought for control. Ember could feel his wolf through the bond now, could feel the war happening inside him. His wolf was howling with joy, recognizing its mate, demanding he claim her immediately. But the man was fighting it with everything he had. She found her voice, though it came out broken and raw from smoke. I did not do anything. The fire, I was going to die, and then she looked down at the collar in her hand, this impossible artifact that should not be in her possession. I do not understand. The Crimson Moon collar chooses bloodline, said a new voice, old and creaking with age. The crowd parted to let through Elder Miriam, the oldest member of the Council of Elders. A woman so ancient her face was a map of wrinkles, and her eyes had gone milky with cataracts. Yet she moved, with purpose toward Ember, her walking stick tapping against stone. When she reached them, she leaned close to Ember, sniffing the air around her, then nodded slowly. Moonfire. I have not smelled that scent in 60 years, not since the Ashworth line was destroyed. Ember stared at her. Ashworth? My name is Ashwood. I am an orphan. I have no line. You were hidden. Elder Miriam's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were commenting on the weather. The Ashworth bloodline carried the primordial Luna gene. They were the original royal family, before the Thornwoods rose to power 300 years ago. The last of the Ashworths was slaughtered in the Purge, when Darius's great-great-grandfather took the throne. Or so we thought. It seems someone survived. Someone hid a child and changed their name. Ashwood instead of Ashworth. Clever. She tapped her stick against the ground. The collar does not lie. It recognizes royal blood. Primordial blood. The kind that runs in this girl's veins, whether she knows it or not. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crackling of the dying fire seemed muted. Ember looked around at the faces surrounding her. Shock. Disbelief. Calculation. Fear. She saw all of it reflected in dozens of pairs of eyes. Beta Logan stood near the back of the crowd, his face twisted with something between horror and fury. The other servants looked at her as if she had grown a second head, and Alpha King Darius looked at her as if she were a high problem he very much wanted to eliminate. This changes nothing, he said, his voice cold and final. The collar will be returned to the vault. An investigation will be conducted into how it came to be removed. And you? He focused on Ember with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the ground. You will be confined to quarters until we determine what is to be done with you. Marcus, see to it. If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. Beta Marcus moved to obey, but Elder Miriam's walking stick shot out, blocking his path. You cannot simply lock her away, Darius. She holds the collar. She survived Moonfire. Her bloodline has been confirmed. Whether you like it or not, she has a claim to recognition. Darius's eyes flashed with barely contained rage. She has a claim to nothing. I am Alpha King. My word is law, and I say this matter will be handled quietly and internally. The old woman laughed, a dry, crackling sound. You think you can keep this quiet? Half the pack witnessed what happened here tonight. By morning, every pack on the continent will know that a primordial bloodline survivor has emerged. You cannot pretend she does not exist. She turned to Ember, and her milky eyes somehow seemed to see straight through her. Child, do you feel the bond? Ember did not want to answer. Admitting it felt like signing her own death warrant. But the truth was written in every cell of her body. Yes, she whispered. I feel it. Elder Miriam nodded. And you, Darius? Do you feel your mate bond with this girl? The Alpha King's silence was answer enough. His jaw was clenched so tight Ember could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. His hands were fisted at his sides. His entire body radiated tension and fury and something else. Something that felt like longing before he brutally crushed it. What I feel is irrelevant, he ground out. I am promised to Lady Seraphina. The alliance with the Northern Pack is critical to maintaining peace. My wolf's reaction to this girl does not change political reality. Actually, it changes everything, said another voice, this one smooth and cultured and dripping with venom. The crowd parted again, and this time it was Lady Seraphina herself who stepped into the firelight. She must have arrived while Ember was trapped in the burning building. She was breathtaking, exactly as beautiful as the rumors claimed. Tall and elegant, with midnight black hair that fell in waves to her waist, pale skin that seemed to glow in the firelight, and eyes the color of amber that fixed on Ember with undisguised hatred. So, this is what delayed your greeting to me, my love. A servant girl playing dress-up with stolen jewelry. She moved to Darius's side, her hand possessively gripping his arm, marking her territory. Though I must admit, the theatrics are impressive. Starting a fire, stealing the collar, convincing that addled old woman to spin tales about lost bloodlines. You must have been planning this for months. Ember felt the accusation like a slap. I did not. I would never. But Seraphina was not finished. She turned to Darius, her expression shifting to one of wounded innocence. Darling, surely you can see what this is. Some desperate Omega who heard about our engagement and concocted this elaborate scheme to insert herself into your life. The collar can be fooled by dark magic. Everyone knows that. We should be investigating which witch she paid to help her with this deception. She reached out as if to take the collar from Ember's hand. Give me that before you damage it further with your... The moment Seraphina's fingers touched the collar, there was a flash of light and a sound like thunder. Seraphina screamed and jerked her hand back, staring at her palm where an angry red burn was forming. The collar had rejected her. Violently. The smugness drained from her face, replaced by shock, and then, more dangerously, fury. Dark magic, she hissed. She has enchanted it somehow. This proves she is working with enemies of the crown. But Elder Miriam was shaking her head. The crimson moon collar cannot be fooled by any magic, dark or light. It is forged from the heart of the first moon, blessed by the Luna goddess herself. It recognizes truth. And the truth, Lady Seraphina, is that this girl has more right to wear that collar than you ever will. The tension in the courtyard had become suffocating. Ember could feel violence hovering in the air, waiting for an excuse to erupt. Seraphina looked like she wanted to tear Ember apart with her bare hands. Several of the Northern Pack wolves who had traveled with Seraphina were growling low in their throats, their eyes fixed on Ember with predatory focus. And Darius stood in the center of it all, looking like a man being torn in two. Enough. His voice was not loud, but it carried absolute authority. Everyone fell silent. This situation requires careful consideration and investigation. Until we determine the truth, Ember Ashwood will be moved to the guest wing of the palace where she can be properly guarded and monitored. The collar will remain in her possession for now, as it seems to have made its choice clear. Lady Seraphina, you and your party will of course be given every courtesy as my honored guests. We will discuss the matter of our engagement privately. Seraphina's eyes narrowed dangerously. Privately, Darius, you cannot seriously be considering... But he cut her off with a look. Privately, Seraphina. Not here. Not now. He turned to Marcus. See to Ember's accommodations, post guards. No one is to speak with her without my permission. Then, without another glance at Ember, or the collar, or the mate bond that was screaming between them, he turned and strode back toward the palace, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. Seraphina followed after a moment, but not before giving Ember a look that promised retribution. When they were gone, the crowd slowly began to disperse, though the whispers followed Ember like a swarm of insects. Marcus approached her carefully, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt. If you will come with me, miss. Miss. Not girl. Not Omega. Miss. The small courtesy felt surreal. Ember looked down at the collar in her hand, this impossible artifact that had destroyed her anonymous existence in a single night. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to run into the forest and disappear. But a larger part, the part that was newly awake and burning with silver fire, knew that running was no longer an option. Her life had changed. She had changed. There was no going back to invisible servitude. For better or worse, she had been seen. She tucked the collar carefully into the pocket of her singed dress and followed Marcus toward a future she could not begin to imagine. The guest wing of the palace was a world away from the servants. Quarters, thick carpets muffled footsteps. Tapestries depicting historic battles and celestial events covered the walls. Sconces held actual beeswax candles instead of tallow. The air smelled of lavender and beeswax instead of lye soap and desperation. Marcus led her to a room that was larger than the entire space she had shared with 3 other girls. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall, made up with linens so fine they looked like they had been woven from clouds. A fireplace with a carved mantel held a cheerfully crackling fire. Glass-paned windows overlooked the garden, and through them Ember could see the moon rising full and heavy over the palace grounds. "There are dresses in the wardrobe," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "Someone will bring you dinner shortly. The bathing chamber is through that door. Do not attempt to leave this room. The guards outside are under orders to prevent your departure by any means necessary." He paused at the door, then turned back. "For what it is worth, I believe Elder Miriam. The collar does not lie. Whatever you are, whoever you are, you did not fake that." Then he was gone, and Ember was alone in a room fit for royalty, wearing rags that smelled of smoke and holding an artifact that had just destroyed her entire understanding of herself. She moved to the window and looked out at the moon. Her wolf stirred inside her, stronger now than it had ever been, pressing against her consciousness as if trying to communicate something urgent. She pressed her palm against the cold glass and felt the collar in her pocket pulse with warmth. Somewhere in this palace, Darius was probably arguing with Seraphina, trying to navigate the political disaster Ember had created just by surviving. Did he resent her? Hate her? She could still feel the mate bond humming between them, an invisible thread connecting her heart to his. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. She had never asked for this. Never. Wanted to be special or important, or noticed. She had made peace with invisibility because it was safe. But safety was no longer an option. She was a threat to the Northern Alliance. She was a complication to the Alpha King's carefully laid plans. She was a living symbol of a bloodline that had been deliberately erased from history. She was, Elder Miriam claimed, royalty. The thought made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Yesterday she'd been scrubbing floors. Tonight she was in a room with a view of the moon and guards at her door. Tomorrow, who knew what fresh impossibilities awaited? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. A young Omega entered carrying a tray laden with food. The girl would not meet Ember's eyes, just set the tray on a small table and hurried out as if afraid Ember might bite her. The food was more than Ember usually ate in a week. Roasted chicken with herbs, fresh bread still warm from the ovens, cheese and fruit, and a carafe of wine. Her stomach growled despite the chaos of the evening. She had not eaten since a hasty breakfast of stale porridge nearly 14 hours ago. She sat at the table and began to eat mechanically, barely tasting the food. Her mind was too full of questions. How had the collar gotten into her hand? Elder Miriam suggested it had come through the fire, but that made no sense. The vault was protected by blood magic and ancient wards. Unless the collar had wanted to find her. Unless it had felt her dying in the flames, and had somehow transported itself to her hand because it recognized her bloodline. The Ashworth line. Primordials. She knew the stories, of course. Everyone did. The Primordials were the first werewolves, created directly by the Luna goddess during the Age of Silver. They were more powerful than modern wolves, able to shift at will regardless of the moon phase, blessed with extended lifespans and abilities that bordered on magic. They had ruled the werewolf kingdoms for millennia until the Great Fracturing, when the bloodlines had begun to splinter and weaken. The Thornwoods had risen to power by being ruthless and strategic, eliminating rival claimants and consolidating power through a combination of military might and political maneuvering. If Ember truly carried primordial blood, if the Ashworth line had survived, then her very existence challenged the legitimacy of the Thornwood dynasty. No wonder Darius had looked at her with such fury. She was not just his mate. She was his potential usurper. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. She finished eating and made her way to the bathing chamber Marcus had indicated. It was luxurious beyond her comprehension. A large copper tub sat ready, steam rising from water that had been drawn and heated in anticipation of her arrival. Scented oils lined a shelf. Soft towels were stacked beside the tub. She stripped off her ruined dress and stepped into the water, hissing as the heat enveloped her. For several minutes she just sat there, letting the warmth soak into her aching muscles, watching the soot and ash float away from her skin. Her hands, which had been red and raw from scrubbing floors, looked different. The skin was still rough, but there was something else now. A faint shimmer just beneath the surface, as if silver light was trying to break through. She flexed her fingers and watched the shimmer intensify. Her wolf surged forward, and for just a moment, her fingers elongated into claws. Ember gasped and jerked her hands out of the water. The claws retracted immediately, leaving behind only human fingers. But she had felt it. The beginning of a shift. After 22 years of nothing, her wolf was finally pushing toward the surface. She finished her bath quickly, dried off, and found a nightgown in the wardrobe that actually fit her. It was made of soft linen and was more comfortable than anything she had ever worn. She climbed into the massive bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible. Her mind would not stop racing, but exhaustion eventually claimed her, and she drifted into troubled dreams of fire and silver light and storm-gray eyes that looked at her with equal parts desire and fury. She woke to the sound of arguing in the hallway outside her room. The sky beyond her window was barely light, the sun just beginning to rise. She sat up, straining to hear the voices through the thick wooden door. "You cannot keep her prisoner, Darius. The council has demanded an audience." That was Elder Miriam's creaking voice. "The council can demand whatever they wish. I will decide when and how to handle this situation." Darius sounded tired and frustrated. "You are being a fool. She is your mate. The bond is clear to anyone with eyes. You cannot simply wish her away because she complicates your political arrangements." A pause. Then Darius's voice, colder than before. "I am Alpha King. I do not have the luxury of following my heart. The Northern Alliance is critical to our security. Seraphina's father commands 10,000 warriors. Without that alliance, we are vulnerable to the Eastern Pacts who have been agitating for war. I will not sacrifice the safety of my entire kingdom for—" He stopped abruptly. "For your mate?" Elder Miriam finished for him. "For the woman the Luna goddess herself has chosen for you? Do you truly think you can build a strong kingdom on a foundation of rejected bonds and political convenience?" The sound of fist-hitting wall made Ember flinch. "I think I can do what is necessary for my people, as I have always done. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a realm to govern." Footsteps retreated down the hallway. A moment later, there was a soft knock on Ember's door. "Enter," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Elder Miriam came in, moving surprisingly spryly for someone who had seemed so ancient the night before. She looked at Ember with those milky eyes and smiled. "You heard, I assume." Ember nodded. "He does not want me here." Elder Miriam settled herself into the chair by the fireplace with a sigh. He does not want to want you, child. There is a difference. His wolf is screaming for you. The mate bond is one of the most powerful forces in our world. He cannot simply ignore it, though he will certainly try. She pulled out a pipe from somewhere in her robes and began to pack it with tobacco. The question is, what do you want? Ember blinked. What I want. I want to understand what is happening to me. I want to know if I truly am this Ashworth descendant, or if this is all some terrible mistake. I want... She stopped, not sure how to put into words the yearning that had opened up inside her. The desire to finally matter, to finally be seen. I want to know who I am. Elder Miriam lit her pipe with a snap of her fingers, actual flame appearing at her fingertip, and Ember filed away the revelation that the old woman had magic for later consideration. Then, you need to access your wolf fully. A primordial shift is different from a normal shift. More painful, more dangerous, but also more revelatory. Your wolf holds the genetic memory of your bloodline. If you can shift completely, you will know the truth of your heritage. She puffed on her pipe, the smoke forming lazy spirals in the morning light. I can help you, but it will not be pleasant, and Darius will not be pleased when he finds out. Ember thought of spending her life in this gilded cage, neither servant nor acknowledged, always a complication to be managed. She thought of the mate bond pulsing between her and a man who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. She thought of the silver fire that had saved her life, and the collar that had chosen her hand. I want to shift, she said firmly. I want to know the truth, whatever it is. Elder Miriam's smile widened. Good. There is steel in you after all. The bloodline breeds true. She stood, joints creaking. Tonight, when the moon rises full, meet me in the sacred grove. Tell no one. Bring the collar. We will wake your wolf properly, and then we will see what the Alpha King makes of the woman his mate truly is. She left as mysteriously as she had come, and Ember was alone again with her thoughts and the crimson moon collar that pulsed with warmth in the pocket of her discarded dress. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Food was brought at regular intervals by silent servants who would not meet her eyes. She tried on several of the dresses in the wardrobe, marveling at the quality of the fabric and the way they actually fit her body instead of hanging like sacks. She had never worn anything that was not a servant's rough homespun. The woman who looked back at her from the mirror was a stranger. As evening approached, Ember's nerves began to fray. What if she failed to shift? What if her wolf still refused to emerge? What if Elder Miriam was wrong, and she was not primordial at all? Just a broken Omega who had somehow tricked an ancient artifact through sheer desperation. But beneath the fear was something else. Determination. For the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path, instead of simply enduring whatever path others forced her down. When the moon began to rise, full and heavy in the darkening sky, Ember retrieved the collar from her pocket and held it in both hands. It was warm, always warm, pulsing with a heartbeat that seemed to sync with her own. She slipped it over her head, and the moment the silver touched her skin, power flooded her system. Her wolf surged forward with a hunger that made her gasp. Yes, the wolf seemed to say. Finally. It is time. If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Ember wrapped herself in a dark cloak she found in the wardrobe and moved to the door. She pressed her ear against the wood, listening. The guards were there. She could hear their quiet conversation, but they were focused on preventing entry rather than departure. She closed her eyes and reached for that silver fire that had saved her from the flames. It came more easily this time, rising through her veins like cool moonlight. She pressed her palm against the door and felt the wood respond to her touch. The lock clicked open silently. When she eased the door open, the guards did not even turn. She slipped past them like a shadow, and they continued their conversation as if she had never been there. Compulsion magic. Another gift of the primordial bloodline, apparently. She made her way through the palace using servants' passages she knew well, avoiding the main corridors where she might be spotted. The sacred grove was a 20-minute walk from the palace, deep in the oldest part of the forest, where the trees grew so close together that sunlight barely penetrated during the day. By moonlight, it was otherworldly. The grove itself was a perfect circle of ancient oaks, surrounding a pool of water so still it looked like black glass. Elder Miriam was already there, standing at the edge of the pool, her pipe glowing in the darkness. "You came," she said, as Ember approached. "I was not certain you would find the courage." Ember bristled slightly. "I have lived 22 years being afraid. I am tired of fear." Elder Miriam laughed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Good. Fear is useful for survival, but useless for transformation. Now, take off the cloak and step into the pool." Ember hesitated. "The water?" The old woman nodded. "The sacred pool reflects truth. It will show your wolf what she needs to see. It will also hurt like the fires of hell, so I suggest you prepare yourself." "Wonderful." Ember removed her cloak and dress, standing in just the thin nightgown, the collar heavy and warm around her neck. She stepped to the edge of the pool and looked down into the dark water. Her reflection stared back at her, but there was something else there too. A shimmer of silver, the shadow of something wild. She stepped into the pool. The water was ice cold, stealing her breath. She waded deeper until she was waist deep, then chest deep. The collar around her neck began to glow, casting silver light across the surface of the water. "Now," Elder Miriam called from the shore. "Call your wolf. Do not ask, do not beg. Command her to come forward. You are her human half. She exists to serve you as you exist. To serve her. You are equals. Partners. Call her as an equal." Ember closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, past the fear and the doubt and the years of being told she was less than nothing. She found that presence, that wild sleeping thing, and this time, instead of timidly approaching, she grabbed it with both hands. "Come," she commanded. "It is time. We are whole. We are powerful. We are done hiding. Come forward now." The wolf answered with a roar that shook Ember's entire being. Pain exploded through every nerve ending as her body began to change. Her bones cracked and reformed. Her muscles tore and rebuilt themselves. Her skin rippled as fur began to push through. She screamed, the sound echoing through the grove, and fell forward into the water. The cold pool closed over her head, and for a moment everything was darkness and agony, and the certainty that she was dying. Then there was light. Silver light. Moonlight. The collar blazed like a star against her chest, and suddenly she was not drowning but swimming. Not human but wolf. She burst from the water on 4 legs, shaking water from fur that gleamed silver in the moonlight. She was huge, far larger than any normal wolf. Power sang through her muscles. Her senses exploded with input. She could smell every creature in the forest, hear the heartbeat of a rabbit 100 yards away, see in perfect clarity despite the darkness. And in her mind, flooding her consciousness, were memories. Not her memories. The memories of her bloodline. She saw a woman with silver hair and eyes like stars standing before an army of wolves, proclaiming the laws that would govern their kind. She saw a great city of silver and stone, where primordials had lived in harmony before the fracturing. She saw a battle, brutal and bloody, where the Thornwoods had systematically hunted and killed every member of the Ashworth line they could find. She saw a woman, heavily pregnant, fleeing through snow with a baby girl clutched to her chest while soldiers pursued her with torches and blades. The woman had changed the baby's name, hidden her in a remote village, and died of her wounds, believing her daughter would be safe in obscurity. That baby had grown up, had a child of her own, who had another child, and another, until the bloodline had thinned to almost nothing, the power sleeping dormant for generations, until Ember, who had been in danger of dying in a fire, and whose blood had woken in response to mortal peril, burning away the centuries of suppression. She was Ember Ashworth, last of the primordial line, rightful heir to the crown that had been stolen from her ancestors. And she was the mate of the Alpha King, whose family had murdered hers. The realization crashed over her with dizzying force. She threw back her head and howled, the sound carrying across the forest and beyond. It was not a sound of grief or rage. It was a sound of awakening, of claiming, of transformation. She was no longer nobody. She was someone who had every right to exist, to take up space, to demand recognition. In the palace, Alpha King Darius Thornwood sat in his study, trying to focus on the trade agreements spread before him, and failing miserably. Seraphina had finally retired to her chambers after hours of pointed questions about his intentions regarding the mate bond and the engagement. He had given her no satisfaction, mostly because he himself had no answers. How did one balance duty to kingdom with duty to mate? How did one ignore a bond that was currently making his wolf claw at his insides with desperate need? Then he heard it. A howl that made every hair on his body stand on end. A howl filled with power and challenge and ancient authority. His wolf recognized it immediately and responded with a howl of his own, forcing its way up his throat before he could stop it. He was on his feet and running before conscious thought could catch up with instinct. He shifted mid-stride, his clothes shredding, his body flowing into his massive black wolf form. He ran toward that call, toward his mate, unable to stop himself even though he knew he should stay away, knew that going to her would only make everything more complicated. But the mate bond was stronger than political considerations, stronger than alliances, stronger than his formidable will. He crashed through the forest and burst into the sacred grove to find Elder Miriam standing calmly by the pool, and the most magnificent wolf he had ever seen standing in the center of the clearing. Silver fur that seemed to glow with inner light, eyes like liquid mercury, twice the size of a normal she-wolf, with an aura of power that made the air around her crackle with energy. His mate. His primordial mate. Ember stood on 4 legs and watched him approach. Through the bond she could feel his shock, his awe, his desire, and underneath it all, his conflict. He stopped 10 feet from her, and they regarded each other in the moonlight, while Elder Miriam watched with undisguised satisfaction. Finally, Ember shifted back to human form. The transformation was easier this time, more natural. She stood naked in the moonlight, her skin still glowing with residual power, the collar the only thing she wore. She was not ashamed. She was magnificent, and she finally knew it. "My name is Ember Ashworth," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am the last of the primordial bloodline. I am descended from the original ruling family of the Werewolf Kingdoms, and I am your mate, whether you want me or not." Darius shifted back to human form, equally unconcerned with his nakedness. He was all hard muscle and predatory grace, and the mate bond pulled between them like a physical cord. "I know who you are," he said roughly. "The question is, what do you intend to do about it?" Ember lifted her chin. "I intend to learn everything about my heritage. I intend to become the wolf I was always meant to be. And I intend to discover whether the man the Luna goddess chose as my mate is worthy of that honor, or if he is too much of a coward to acknowledge what stands before him." The challenge in her words hung in the air between them. Darius's eyes flashed dangerously. "You dare call me coward?" But there was no real anger in his voice. Instead, there was something that sounded almost like respect. Ember took a step toward him. The collar flared with light. "I dare everything now. I spent my life being silent and small and invisible, That life is over. I am done apologizing for existing. The question is, are you strong enough to stand beside a mate who will not simply obey and fade into the background? Or do you need a decorative queen who will smile and bow and never challenge you? She was playing with fire. Challenging an alpha king was dangerous under the best circumstances, but she was primordial. She carried power in her blood that rivaled his, and more importantly, she was done living in fear. Darius moved toward her with predatory speed, but when he reached her, he did not attack. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands and leaned down until their foreheads touched. The bond blazed between them, and Ember gasped at the intensity of sensation. Connection. Completion. The feeling of two halves finally coming together. "You terrify me," he breathed against her lips. "You are everything I cannot have and everything I cannot stop wanting. You are a threat to everything I have built, and yet my wolf will accept no other. What am I supposed to do with you, Ember Ashworth?" She reached up and covered his hands with her own. "You are supposed to choose. Duty or destiny. Alliance or mate. The crown you inherited or the mate the Luna goddess gave you. But know this, I will not wait forever. I will not be your secret shame or your political inconvenience. I am claiming my heritage. I am claiming my power. The only question is whether I claim you as well, or if I walk away and let you marry your northern princess while the mate bond slowly destroys us both." It was ultimatum and invitation in equal measure. Darius closed his eyes, his jaw clenching with the force of his internal battle. When he opened them again, something had shifted. Decision had been made. The engagement to Seraphina is political convenience, not a true bond. I have never touched her. I have never wanted to. The alliance with the Northern Pack is important, but perhaps it is not essential. Perhaps there are other ways to secure our borders. And perhaps, he paused, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone. Perhaps it is time the Thornwood line acknowledged the debts it owes to the Ashworth line. Ember's heart stuttered. "What are you saying?" His smile was slight but genuine. "I am saying that you are right. I have been a coward. I have been so focused on maintaining the kingdom my ancestors built that I forgot to ask whether their methods were just. They built this kingdom on murder and treachery. They destroyed an entire bloodline to secure power. That is not strength. It is fear. And I will not continue their legacy." He released her face and stepped back. Then, to her absolute shock, he lowered himself to one knee. "I, Darius Thornwood, Alpha King of the Southern Territories, acknowledge Ember Ashworth as my true mate, chosen by the Luna goddess. I acknowledge her primordial bloodline and her right to recognition and title. And I offer her partnership in ruling this kingdom, not as my subordinate, but as my equal." Elder Miriam let out a cackle of delight. "Well, that went better than I expected." Ember stared down at Darius, this powerful man kneeling before her under the full moon, offering her everything she had never dared to dream of. She could feel the truth of his words through the bond. He meant it. He was choosing her, choosing them. She held out her hand, and he took it, standing in one fluid motion. "I accept," she said simply. "Though I warn you, how to be a queen. I have no idea. I barely know how to be a wolf." His laugh was low and warm. "Then we will figure it out together. You can teach me about primordial magic, and I will teach you about politics and governance. Between us, we might actually build something worth having." He pulled her against him, and this time when their lips met, there was no hesitation, no conflict. The mate bond blazed between them like a star-going nova, and Ember felt complete for the first time in her life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his chest and let herself simply feel safe, wanted, chosen. "What about Lady Seraphina?" she asked quietly. "She will not take this well. Darius's arms tightened around her. Let me worry about Seraphina. She is ambitious and will be furious, but she is also pragmatic. She will return to the Northern Pack, and I will offer alternative trade agreements and political concessions to smooth things over with her father. It will be messy, but it will be handled. He pulled back enough to look down at her. You, meanwhile, need to prepare yourself. When word spreads that a primordial has emerged and that she is my mate, every pack on the continent will have opinions. Some will see it as validation of a new era. Others will see it as threat to stability. We will face challenges politically and possibly militarily. Ember nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. But it was different from the weight she had carried before. This was not the crushing burden of invisibility and worthlessness. This was the purposeful weight of duty and destiny. I am ready, she said, for whatever comes. Elder Miriam approached them, still puffing on her pipe. The council will convene in the morning. You will need to present your case formally. There will be tests to verify her bloodline, though the collar and her shift should be proof enough for anyone with sense. And you will need to decide how to structure the transition of power. The Ashworth line has legitimate claim to the throne by right of primogeniture. The Thornwood line has claim by conquest and 3 centuries of rule. You could fight over precedence, or... She grinned, showing teeth that were still remarkably sharp for someone her age. You could do what kings and queens have done since time immemorial. Unite the lines through mating and rule together. Darius looked at Ember with an expression that made her breath catch. Is that something you would want? To rule with me? To take on the burden of leadership? She thought about it for a moment. Yesterday the thought would have been laughable. Today, after feeling the power of her bloodline, after accessing the genetic memories of her ancestors who had ruled wisely and justly, it felt almost inevitable. Yes, she said. But not as your subordinate or your decoration. As your partner. Your equal. With equal voice in decisions and equal responsibility for outcomes. His smile was fierce and proud. I would expect nothing less. You are primordial. Your bloodline practically invented governance. I would be a fool not to make use of that wisdom. He bent and kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a claim. Come. Let us return to the palace before someone notices we are both missing and starts a panic. They dressed quickly in the clothes they had shed before shifting, though Ember's simple servant's dress looked absurdly out of place paired with the crimson moon collar. Darius noticed and frowned. Tomorrow, we will commission an entire wardrobe for you, clothing worthy of a queen. The word queen still felt foreign, but Ember was beginning to believe she might grow into it. They walked back to the palace together, and this time when they entered through the main doors instead of the servants' entrance, Ember felt the symbolism of it. She was no longer sneaking through shadows. She was walking through the front door and the arm of the Alpha King. The guards on duty did double takes but said nothing, though Ember could see the news spreading through the palace in real time as servants and guards whispered to each other. By the time they reached the private royal wing, Lady Seraphina was waiting for them in the corridor. She had clearly been alerted to their return. Her face was a mask of cold fury. So it is true, she said, her voice like ice. You have chosen this servant over an alliance that has been in negotiation for 2 years. Over me. Darius met her anger with calm certainty. She is not a servant. She is primordial. She is my mate. And yes, I am choosing her. I apologize for the disrespect this shows you and your family, and I will do everything in my power to maintain positive relations with the Northern Pack. But I cannot and will not reject my mate to satisfy political convenience. Seraphina's laugh was bitter. Political convenience. You call the security of your southern borders political convenience? When my father withdraws his forces from the border alliance, when the Eastern Pack see weakness in your position, When you find yourself fighting on multiple fronts with reduced forces, remember this moment. Remember that you threw away power for the sake of a pretty face and an ancient bloodline that was destroyed for good reason. Ember felt anger flare hot in her chest. The Ashworth line was destroyed because they would not bow to tyranny. They were murdered because they stood for justice and equality, which threatened your ancestors' ambitions. Seraphina turned her cold gaze on Ember. You know nothing of history or politics, little Omega. You know nothing of the realities of ruling. You will be eaten alive by the machinations of this court. And when you fail, when you prove inadequate to the role you have stumbled into, remember that I warned you. She looked back at Darius. I leave for the Northern Territories at dawn. I will inform my father that the engagement is dissolved and that you have chosen to weaken your position through sentiment. He will be disappointed. The threat in her words was clear. The Northern Pack was powerful. Their displeasure could have serious consequences. But Darius did not flinch. Your father is a reasonable man. I will send envoys with proposals for alternative alliances. We can still be partners even if we are not joined through marriage. Seraphina's smile was sharp and cruel. Perhaps. Or perhaps he will decide that a king who makes decisions based on mate bonds rather than strategic thinking is not a king worth allying with at all. She swept past them, her guards falling into step behind her, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and veiled threats. When she was gone, Ember let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She is right about one thing. I do not know anything about politics or ruling. I spent my life scrubbing floors. How am I supposed to navigate the intricacies of pack alliances and governing? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming? Darius turned to her, his expression serious but warm. The same way you survived 22 years of being invisible and underestimated. With intelligence, observation, and the strength to keep going, even when everything seems impossible. You have already proven yourself more resilient than most wolves I know. The rest, we will learn. Together. He took her hand. Come. You need rest. Tomorrow will be intense. The council, the formal acknowledgement, dealing with the fallout from Seraphina's departure. But tonight, let us simply be Darius and Ember, two mates who have finally found each other. He led her to his private chambers, rooms that were even more luxurious than the guest quarters she had been assigned. The bed was massive, the fireplace already lit and crackling. It felt intimate and overwhelming in equal measure. Darius must have sensed her nervousness, because he smiled gently. I am not expecting anything tonight, except your presence. We have time to navigate the physical aspects of the mate bond. For now, I simply want to hold you while you sleep and know that you are real, that you are mine, that the Luna goddess has given me something I do not deserve, but will spend my life trying to be worthy of. Ember felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so long believing she was unworthy of love, or tenderness. Having it offered so freely was almost more than she could process. She let him help her out of her dress, let him wrap her in one of his shirts that fell to her knees, let him pull her into the massive bed and tuck her against his side. The mate bond hummed between them, satisfied and content now that they were together. As she drifted toward sleep, feeling safer than she had ever felt in her life, Ember thought about the journey ahead. There would be challenges. There would be opposition. There would be people who resented her rise from nothing to queen. But she was primordial. She carried the blood of rulers and warriors. She had survived fire and emerged holding an artifact of power. She had woken her wolf and reclaimed her heritage. And she had a mate who was willing to stand beside her as an equal, to share power rather than hoard it, to build something new from the ashes of old injustices. Tomorrow, she would begin to learn what it meant to be queen. Tonight, she was simply Ember, held safe in the arms of the man destiny had chosen for her. No longer invisible but seen, no longer nothing but everything, no longer lost but finally, miraculously found. The fire crackled in the hearth. The moon shone through the windows, and the crimson moon collar rested on the bedside table, glowing softly with approval, having finally found its way to the one it had been waiting for all along.